From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Thursday, May 15, 2025. A whistleblower tried to warn the NDIS a disability care provider was sending untrained staff out on the job a year before it was investigated for possible fraud. Cocoon SDA says it's done nothing wrong. That's an exclusive, live now at theaustralian.com.au. A mushroom expert asked to analyse the remains of a fatal beef Wellington lunch kept the leftovers in her fridge at home. That's part of the expert evidence as the Erin Patterson murder trial digs into exactly how 3 people died after a family meal. Erin Patterson is pleading not guilty. Today, where Erin Patterson's defence lawyers are going with detailed evidence about mushrooms. The infinite variety of mushrooms. That's where the Erin Patterson murder trial is going deep, with expert evidence about exactly what deadly mushrooms look like and how they might be similar or different in appearance to perfectly innocuous ones.
There are millions of mushrooms in regional Victoria. Who knew? Some are poisonous, some are not poisonous, some have bumps on their caps, some don't have bumps on their caps, some are white, some are brown, some are yellow, some are green. There are lots of mushrooms in Victoria.
Ellie Dudley is the Australian's legal affairs correspondent and she's covering the trial in Morwell in Victoria's Latrobe Valley. The Crown case is that Erin Patterson deliberately cooked death cap mushrooms in a beef Wellington she served to 4 elderly relatives on July 29, 2023. She's pleaded not guilty and her defence says it was a terrible accident. Ellie, I believe you're now qualified for a degree in mycology after sitting through several days of this evidence about mushrooms.
Yeah, I think I'm considering a career change, Claire. Goodbye journalism, hello mycology. But yeah, look, I know all about the buttery, colibia, the Springfield cap, the shaggy parasol, honey mushrooms, and of course, most importantly, death cap mushrooms.
Ellie, we won't know until the defence's closing statement exactly where they're going to take this, but we do know that Erin Patterson's lead defence counsel, Colin Mandy SC, told the jury on day one the deaths were a terrible tragedy. Here's a voice actor reading Colin Mandy's words.
The starting point for you is that Erin Patterson is innocent of this charge. So as you listen to the evidence, you should consider when it comes to that fundamental issue of Erin's intention, did she have a motive to kill?
So where has the mushroom evidence taken us so far and what do the defence lawyers want to know from these expert witnesses?
So what Defence Counsel Sophie Stafford was doing today with mycologist Tom May was showing him photos of death cap mushroom lookalikes and asking for him to identify similarities, I guess, with death cap mushrooms. So things like them having a smooth top, them having a cup at the bottom of the stem, things like that, and identifying the fact that he couldn't definitively say, based off a photo, whether these were death cap mushrooms or if they were other mushrooms entirely.
Tom May gave some evidence about the smell of death cap mushrooms. What's the significance of that?
Well, at some point, Erin Patterson told one of her doctors that the mushrooms had an extremely strong smell. And Tom May today gave evidence that he has dried out death cap mushrooms before. He said they've got quite a bitter, sweet smell when they're first picked, but once they're dried out, he said they've got an extremely unpleasant smell.
We heard from another mycologist, Camille Trong, who told the jury she was asked to analyse some leftovers that had been obtained from Erin Patterson's home. That was happening as doctors were trying to work out what was wrong with Erin Patterson's lunch guests, her elderly relatives, Don and Gail Patterson and Ian and Heather Wilkinson. It's a real contrast, isn't it, between the urgency and sort of rising panic of the doctors back at the hospital and Camille Trong's quite painstaking and careful examination of the leftovers she'd been given.
Yeah, the jury is being painted a very interesting image of all these doctors running around various hospitals with poor people who are dying in front of them. And then you've got Camille Trong in her home where the beef Wellington leftovers ended up, with tweezers, gloves, a microscope, sort of painstakingly examining these very finely chopped mushrooms that had been sent to her in an urgent taxi from the Monash Medical Centre. Part of that evidence, which was quite interesting, is that Camille Trong said that she didn't find any death cap mushrooms in the sample that she had been sent. She said the only mushrooms that she found were mushrooms that you'd typically find in a grocery store.
She also said she told authorities when they were asking about what potentially could have poisoned these people that she didn't think it was likely to have been death cap mushrooms. Why not?
She said that it was unlikely because death cap mushrooms hadn't been spotted in the area. The other part of that is she was told by Laura Muldoon, who's the emergency registrar at the Monash Medical Centre, that she had been told by Erin Patterson that the mushrooms had been bought from a supermarket and also from a Chinese grocery store. And Camille Trong told the court that it was probably impossible that death cap mushrooms could have been bought from a store because they grow in the wild and they can't be cultivated.
Dr. Tom May, whose alter ego, of course, is Funky Tom, he's one of the people who posted these images of death cap mushrooms on the iNaturalist website. When he was in the witness box, Ellie, did he seem to indicate that it was easy to tell a death cap mushroom from any other kind of mushroom?
He wasn't very definitive when he was identifying death cap mushrooms. So he works for effectively the poisons hotline in Victoria. And so when he is sent an image, he isn't definitive when describing it as a death cap mushroom or not. He says that some of its features can be highly consistent with death cap mushrooms, things like that smooth top, the yellowish cap, the lump on the bottom of the stem. So he drew comparisons between death cap mushrooms and death cap mushroom lookalikes. And he said that when looking at an image, he would be hesitant to say that that mushroom is a death cap mushroom, but that would be a different scenario, say if he was out in the field and he was with a bunch of field workers or students and he saw a death cap mushroom, he said that he would be much more likely to be definitive in that instance.
Here's what prosecutor Nanette Rogers told the jury in her opening right at the beginning of this trial. Erin Patterson's browsing history showed she had looked at a website, iNaturalist, where experts and amateurs can share the location of wildlife they've spotted in the bush. And that's where the phone records come in. Patterson's phone was pinging cell towers, Rogers told the court, in areas where iNaturalist users had earlier reported death caps. In April 2023, a retired pharmacist named Christine Mackenzie observed death cap mushrooms on a walk with her husband and grandson in the township of Lock, about 28 kilometres from Leongatha, where Patterson lived. We've used a voice actor to bring you Nanette Rogers' words spoken in court.
She collected and disposed of every example of death cap mushrooms that she could find. She did this because she knew how dangerous they were. She posted 4 photographs of this sighting to the iNaturalist website page using her username, ChrisMCK, which geotagged the discovery location.
Rogers said on 28 April, Patterson bought a Sunbeam dehydrator.
On that morning, 2.5 hours before she bought the dehydrator, the accused mobile service data from her phone suggests that she travelled to and remained in the Lock area before returning to Korumburra.
3 weeks later, mycologist Tom May posted on iNaturalist that he'd found death cap mushrooms at Nielsen Street, Outram, pinpointing the location to within 20 metres of where he found the mushrooms. May used the handle Funky Tom.
The very next day, the accused mobile service data suggests that she travelled to and remained in the Lock area at around 10 a.m. before returning to Leongatha. Later that same day, her mobile service data suggests that, having travelled to Lock between 9 and 10 a.m, she travelled from Leongatha to the Outram area at around 11 a.m. before returning to Leongatha.
Coming up, another mushroom death and why authorities fear more people are at risk. The trial has heard Victorian authorities were worried about people cooking and eating deadly mushrooms after a death last year. In 2024, according to Erin Patterson's defence counsel Sophie Stafford SC, a woman died after consuming Amanita phalloides, death cap mushrooms she found in her garden.
So this is a story about a woman who in April 2024 found mushrooms in the front of her home, and she cooked them into a meal that she served to her and her son. Now, when they ate them in April 2024, they went to bed that night, completely fine, woke up the next morning, no issues, off they went. A month or so later, she found mushrooms again, and again showed them to her son, again made them into a meal that both she and her son ate. But this time at about 2 a.m. that night, she woke up unwell. She was going to the bathroom. Her son came and checked on her, and she was very unwell. He fell unwell as well at about 6 a.m. They both ended up in hospital the next day. She died and he survived. And it was later found by the coroner that it was due to death cap mushroom poisoning that both of these people fell ill and how the mother ended up eventually dying.
Sophie Stafford SC, who is Erin Patterson's barrister, told the court that both those mushrooms, the innocuous ones that didn't make the mother and son sick and then the ones that apparently killed the mother, were growing in the same spot in that front yard. Now, the mycologist Dr May said he'd been asked by the Victorian Department of Health to advise on how to respond to coronial recommendations that arose from that case, including that there should be more public health messaging about the dangers of consuming wild mushrooms. Did we hear whether that had happened, that there had been more public health messaging?
Dr May indicated that the Victorian Department of Health was very concerned about what to do after this mother died after eating wild mushrooms that she had found on her property. And other evidence that Dr May has given is that he advises on people effectively undergoing an apprenticeship before they forage for wild mushrooms, that they get proper training under their belt before they undertake that sort of a task, because there appears to be a rise in people foraging for wild mushrooms in Victoria. So look, with this rising popularity of foraging, which he says is partly to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, clearly there is more that has been done or more that is being done about people looking for wild mushrooms in this state.
Ellie Dudley is The Australian's legal affairs reporter. You can follow her live coverage and read our colleague John Ferguson's analysis and reporting every day at theaustralian.com.au.